She signed the confession they put in front of her. She had no idea it would take her son from her. By the time she found out the truth, her grandchild was already 4 years old. And the woman who destroyed her life was about to ask her for forgiveness. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure you're subscribed, because by the end of this one, you're going to have an opinion about forgiveness you didn't expect to have. Diane Ellison had buried 2 husbands. She was not going to lose the one thing she had left her son and the family name that came with him. So when the letter came from the hiring agency, she read it twice before she called her housekeeper. "There's a new girl starting Monday," Diane said. "Make sure she understands her place before she understands anything else." The housekeeper, Yvonne, had worked for the Ellison family for 11 years, long enough to know that understanding her place meant something specific in that house. It meant learning the rules before you learn the people. It meant memorizing which door not to use, which room not to linger in, which silences you were expected to fill, and which ones you were expected to disappear inside of. Yvonne had learned all of it. She'd never once complained. And she'd watched 3 young women come through that house in the past 4 years, each one gone within 6 months. She kept a mental list of their faces sometimes, late at night, wondering if any of them had landed somewhere better. She hoped so. She never let herself ask Diane what had actually happened to any of them. She didn't say any of that to the new girl. She just handed her a folded list of house rules and said, "Read this twice before Monday." Angela Reeves was 26 years old and had exactly $400 to her name, 380 of which were already spoken for. Her father's dialysis didn't care whose fault the debt was. She sat in the back of the agency car with the folded list in her lap and didn't read it. Not yet. She was looking out the window instead, at the houses getting bigger and the yards getting greener the closer they got to the Ellison estate, thinking about her father's hospital room, thinking about the exact dollar amount still owed by Friday, thinking that none of this, the gates, the hedges, shaped like something out of a magazine, of the fountain she could already see from the road. None of it was going to matter if she couldn't hold this job for at least 6 months. "You'll like it here," the agency woman told her, misreading her silence as awe instead of arithmetic. "Just don't speak unless spoken to, and never look Mrs. Ellison in the eye for too long." Angela almost laughed. She'd worked 2 jobs since she was 17. She'd waited tables for men who thought a low-cut shirt was an invitation. She'd cleaned hotel rooms for guests who left worse messes on purpose just to watch her clean them up. She could survive one difficult old woman. She had no idea Diane Ellison wasn't the difficult one in that house. Her first morning, Yvonne walked her through the house room by room, reciting the rules in the same flat, practiced voice she probably used with every girl before her. Breakfast by 7. Never run the dryer past 9 at night. The noise carried up to the west wing. Never speak first to Mr. Ellison unless he addressed her directly. Angela nodded along, filing each rule away the same way she filed away everything else that had ever been demanded of her, quietly, without complaint, because complaint had never once fixed anything in her life before. By the end of that first week, her hands had memorized the house better than her mind had. She knew which floorboard in the hallway creaked, which cabinet door stuck, which chair at the dining table wobbled if you leaned on it wrong. She was good at this. She had always been good at making herself useful in places that didn't want her to be seen. She thought about her mother sometimes. In those early weeks, a woman who had cleaned houses, much like this one, for 20 years before her back gave out, who used to tell Angela that the secret to surviving work like this was simple. You let them own the house, but you never let them own you. Angela had been repeating that sentence to herself since she was 12 years old. She didn't know yet how much that single sentence was about to be tested. Her mother had died 3 years before any of this, and Angela sometimes wondered what she would have made of the Ellison estate, the marble, the fountain, the careful cruelty dressed up as manners. Probably nothing surprised her mother by the end. She'd worked in enough houses like it to know the type of family that lived behind gates that grand. The other staff kept a respectful distance from her those first weeks, not out of unkindness, but out of the same instinct Yvonne had, the quiet math of not getting attached to someone who statistically wouldn't last past month 6. Only the groundskeeper, an older man named Walter, ever really talked to her, mostly about nothing, the weather, the state of the hedges, a granddaughter he was clearly proud of. She didn't know yet how much that small kindness would matter 4 years later. If you love a slow burn revenge story, drop a like before this one gets good, and trust me, it gets good. Xavier Ellison ran the family's shipping company from a home office because it was easier than sitting across from his mother at dinner. He barely noticed the new housekeeper the first week. Then he noticed she never once flinched when his mother raised her voice. She just kept working, jaw tight, eyes down, like a woman who had learned a long time ago that dignity was something you kept inside where nobody could take it from you. He noticed the way she refolded the same towel twice if the first fold wasn't perfectly square, not because anyone was watching, but because she seemed to need one thing in her day to come out exactly right. He noticed she hummed under her breath in the kitchen at night, when she thought the house was empty, always the same song, something he didn't recognize, something that sounded like it belonged to a person, not an employee. "You're new," he said one night, finding her still in the kitchen at 11. "Yes, sir. I didn't mean to still be here. You don't have to call me sir." "I do, actually," she almost smiled. "Your mother has rules." He laughed, really laughed for what felt like the first time in a year. Over the next 2 months, that 11 o'clock kitchen became a habit neither of them named out loud. He'd come down for water he didn't need. She'd already be there, finishing whatever task Diane had assigned that she hadn't gotten to during daylight hours. They talked about nothing, a documentary she'd half-watched, a shipping delay he couldn't solve, her father's stubbornness about taking his medication on schedule. Small things, human things. The kind of things that don't feel dangerous until you realize how much you've started looking forward to them. One night he told her about his father, how the man had built the shipping company from a single leased truck, how he used to bring Xavier down to the docks on Saturday mornings before Diane decided that wasn't the kind of childhood a Ellison heir was supposed to have. "She wanted me indoors, learning contracts," he said. "He wanted me to know what it felt like to actually load something onto a boat with my own hands. I think about that a lot now, which version of me she actually got." Angela didn't say much back. She didn't need to. She just listened the way she'd learned to listen to her own father during the long nights at his bedside fully, without waiting for her turn to talk. Xavier noticed that too. Nobody in his life had ever just listened to him without an angle. There was one afternoon, a few weeks into all of it, when a shipment got held up at customs and Xavier spent 3 hours on the phone trying to salvage a contract that was slipping through his fingers in real time. Angela brought him coffee without being asked, twice. And the second time she stayed just long enough to say, "You're going to solve it. You always figure it out. I've watched you do it for 2 months now." It wasn't flattery. It was just true. And something about hearing it stated so plainly by someone with nothing to gain from saying it steadied him more than anything his mother had ever said about the family legacy. He started noticing things about himself in her presence that he hadn't noticed in years, that he laughed easier, that he didn't feel the need to perform competence, that the version of himself he was around her felt less like the heir to a shipping empire and more like the boy his father used to take down to the docks. His fiancée, Vanessa, noticed the changes in him before either of them did. "She looks at him like she has secrets," Vanessa told Diane over tea. "I don't like it." "Then we'll make sure she doesn't stay long enough to have any," Diane said, and meant it the way she meant everything as a plan already halfway built. Vanessa didn't ask what that meant. She'd learned a long time ago that some of Diane's plans were better left unquestioned until after they'd already worked. If you can already feel where this is going, drop a like. You know exactly the kind of mother-in-law we're dealing with. It happened on a Thursday. Angela remembered because Thursdays were the only night she called her father's nurse for an update, and she always left her tea on the counter to take that call 5 minutes, no more, timed the way she timed everything now, down to the exact number of minutes she could steal for herself without falling behind. She'd left her tea on the counter. When she came back, Diane was standing right beside it. "Odd little habit," Diane said, walking away without looking back. "Leaving your drink unattended in someone else's home." Angela thought nothing of it. She was tired in the specific way that made you stop asking questions your body already knew the answer to. She drank the tea. 20 minutes later, the room started to tilt. Gently at first, like a boat rocking, and then all at once, like the floor had decided it no longer wanted to hold her up. She remembered reaching for the counter and missing it. She remembered thinking, with the strange calm of a mind already slipping under, that she needed to call someone, though she couldn't picture who. Then there was nothing at all, just a gap in her own life she would spend the next 4 years unable to fill in, no matter how many times she tried. She woke up in Xavier's bed with no memory of how she got there, and Vanessa standing in the doorway with a photograph already taken. I knew it, Vanessa said, voice shaking with something that looked almost like relief. I knew this whole time. I don't understand. Angela tried to sit up, and the room spun again, the ceiling swimming, her own hands feeling like they belonged to someone else. Get her out of this house, Diane said from the hallway, not even raising her voice. Tonight, Xavier, woken by the noise, stood frozen in his own doorway, looking at the photograph, looking at Angela, looking at his mother's composed, unbothered face and believing, for reasons he would spend the next 4 years regretting, the version of the story that came from the woman who raised him. I trusted you, was all he said. She wanted to scream that she trusted him too, that something was wrong with her body, that she remembered a teacup and nothing after it, but the words came out slurred and desperate, exactly the way a guilty woman's excuses would sound, and she watched his face close like a door. Downstairs, Diane was already on the phone with Vanessa's father before Angela had even finished packing. It's handled, she said. The engagement stands. She didn't mention Angela's name once in that conversation. By the time she hung up, she had already filed the whole thing away as a problem she'd solved, not a person she'd destroyed. Have you ever been blamed for something you had no memory of and watched someone believe the worst version of you instead of asking a single question? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear it. Angela didn't fight it. There was no version of that argument she could win against an Ellison in an Ellison house. Not with her head still swimming and her legal vocabulary limited to please and I didn't, and you have to believe me. She packed one bag. She didn't take the severance envelope Diane tried to hand her at the door. Keep it, Angela said. I don't want anything from this family. She would regret those words within 3 weeks, when the second line on a pregnancy test changed everything she thought she knew about wanting nothing. The drive home took 40 minutes. She spent every one of them rehearsing what she'd say to her father, and none of the versions sounded believable, even to her. I lost the job. No, I got fired. No, they said I did something. No, I don't remember doing anything at all. And that's the part that scares me most, Dad. Not what they think happened. What I don't remember. She never said any of it. Her father was sleeping when she got home, tubes and monitors doing the parts of his body that had stopped volunteering. She sat by his bed until sunrise, and somewhere in those quiet hours, she made herself a promise. Whatever had happened in that house, she was not going to let it define the rest of her life. She didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Falling apart was for people who had someone else to catch them. The following week, the agency called to say the Ellison house had reported an incident and that Angela would no longer be placed with any of their client families. Nobody asked her side. Nobody asked at all. She spent the next several days applying for anything that would take her retail, another agency, a call center 2 towns over. Every application asked for a reference from her most recent employer. She left that field blank every single time, watching 4 years of clean work history collapse into a silence she couldn't explain to anyone without sounding exactly as guilty as they already believed her to be. Her father died before she could tell him he was going to be a grandfather. She buried him with money she borrowed from a woman 2 trailers down, and she promised herself, standing at that graveside in the rain, that her child would never know what it felt like to be looked at the way Diane Ellison had looked at her. This is where most stories skip ahead with a title card. This one doesn't, because the 4 years in between were the whole point. Angela started with a sewing machine that jammed every 3rd stitch and a card table she used as a cutting surface in a 1-bedroom she shared with a newborn who cried like he already understood how unfair things could be. She took in hemming jobs, first $5 a pair of pants, 10 if they wanted it same day. Then alterations. Then, slowly, word of mouth. She does good work, and she doesn't judge you for the size on the tag. She worked mornings at a diner and nights at her machine, and somewhere in between she learned to nurse Micah with one arm while pinning a hem with the other. She learned which cries meant hungry and which meant lonely, because sometimes a baby cries just to know someone's still in the room. I am not going to be the woman who let this break her, she told herself, some nights, out loud, to no one. I am going to be the woman my son looks at one day and thinks, she never once let go of the wheel. There were nights she cried in the bathroom with the fan running so Micah wouldn't hear it through the wall. There were mornings she woke up before her alarm, just to have 15 minutes where nobody needed anything from her 15 minutes, to just be Angela, not Mom, not the woman who does alterations, not the woman who got fired from the Ellison house for a thing she still, 4 years later, could not fully explain to herself. The diner let her go the winter. Micah turned 1. After she'd had to call out twice in 1 month when he ran a fever, the doctor couldn't quite explain. She didn't argue. She'd learned there wasn't much point arguing with people who'd already decided what kind of woman you were. She took on more sewing instead, working past midnight some nights with Micah asleep in a laundry basket lined with fabric scraps beside the machine. The hum of the motor, the only lullaby either of them needed. There was a particular customer that first winter, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who came in demanding a full refund on a dress. Angela had altered perfectly, insisting loudly in front of 2 other customers that girls like you always cut corners. Angela didn't cut corners. She'd triple-checked every seam herself. She gave the refund anyway, because arguing with a woman like that in a shop she couldn't afford to lose customers over wasn't a fight worth having, and because 4 years in the Ellison house had taught her exactly how little her own word counted for against a certain kind of certainty, she cried in the back room after Mrs. Patterson left, once, quietly, and then she went back out front and helped the next customer like nothing had happened at all. She never told Xavier. Not out of spite, out of self-preservation. A woman who'd been erased once wasn't eager to hand the eraser back to the same family. There was a night, deep into year 1, when Micah spiked a fever so high the emergency room doctor used the word concerning twice in one sentence. Angela sat in that waiting room until 4 in the morning, with no one to call, no father left to call, no family in this city at all, just her own hands gripping the armrests and a silent, furious prayer that she refused to let turn into panic in front of her son. He was fine by morning. She was not the same afterward, that night taught her. In a way nothing else had. Exactly how alone she really was, and exactly how much she was going to have to become in order for that not to matter. By year 2, she'd saved enough to rent a real storefront, narrow, drafty, with a hand-lettered sign that just said, Angela's alterations in paint. She'd mixed herself because the pre-made colors were $4 more than she had that week. The landlord, an older man named Mr. Okafor, cut her first month's rent in half when he found out she was doing it all on her own with a toddler in tow. Everybody needs one person who just says yes for once, he told her. She never forgot that. By year 3, she had a part-time employee, a woman named Denise, who'd also once worked as household help and understood, without needing it explained, exactly what kind of houses left marks on a person that didn't show up in any photograph. Denise never asked about Micah's father. Angela never offered. Some kindnesses are just knowing which questions not to ask. The 2 of them built something between them that year that felt, on the hard days, like the closest thing Angela had to family. Denise taught her which fabrics to never discount, which customers to trust on credit, and which ones never to. In return, Angela taught her the sewing techniques she'd taught herself out of library books during Micah's nap times: French seams, invisible hems, the kind of finishing work that turned a $5 hemming job into a $15 one, once word got around that it was worth it. Micah started preschool that same year, and Angela remembered standing at the drop-off line on his very first day, watching him walk in clutching a backpack twice his size, thinking that this was the first version of his life that had nothing to do with the Ellison house at all. No shadow of it, no debt to it, nothing borrowed from it. That thought carried her through more hard weeks than she ever admitted to anyone. Micah grew up in that shop. He napped in a laundry basket lined with fabric scraps. He learned to count using buttons. He asked, around age 3, why he didn't have a daddy like the other kids at the park, and Angela gave him the only honest answer she had. Your daddy doesn't know about you yet, baby. One day he might. And when he does, I want you to know it was never because you weren't wanted. It was because some things take time to come out right, just like your buttons. He seemed to accept that, the way 3-year-olds accept most things fully, without needing it explained further, and went back to lining his buttons up by color on the shop floor. There was one night, close to the end of year 3, when Angela sat alone in the shop after closing, doing the books by hand because she still couldn't afford software, and she let herself think, just for a moment, just once, about what it would mean to call the Ellison house and tell Xavier the truth. She thought about it for almost an hour before she talked herself out of it. She wasn't protecting herself from him, not exactly. She was protecting herself from the version of that family who had already decided once what kind of woman she was without asking her a single question first. She wasn't ready to hand them that power again. She closed the books, turned off the lights, and told herself the same thing she'd told herself every night for 3 years, not yet. Then, one gray Tuesday in year 4, the bell over her shop door rang, and she looked up into a face she'd spent 4 years trying to forget. Angela? Xavier's voice cracked on her name. Behind him, a boy's laughter rang out from the back room. A boy who looked exactly like the man standing frozen in her doorway. If your heart just dropped reading that, smash the like button. This is where the truth finally starts working its way loose. It wasn't Xavier who cracked the case, though. That part came a week before he ever walked into her shop, a fact he'd only pieced together later, once the timeline stopped protecting his mother. It started with Walter. The old groundskeeper Diane had fired the same week she fired Angela, showing up on Xavier's doorstep 4 years later. Guilt finally heavier than fear. He'd almost turned around twice on the walk up the drive. He'd told himself for 4 years that it wasn't his place to say anything, that a groundskeeper who valued his next job kept his mouth shut about things that happened inside a family's walls. But his granddaughter had just turned 5, the same age Micah would have been by then had he known to count, and something about watching her learn to trust adults blindly had cracked something open in him that 4 years of silence hadn't managed to close. He remembered the night itself more clearly than he wanted to. Diane had called him to the kitchen just past 10, told him to make sure the side gate stayed unlocked, and to say nothing to anyone about it. He hadn't known what it was for until the next morning, when Angela was already gone and Vanessa was already telling a version of events he knew, from the moment he heard it, wasn't the whole truth. He'd carried that knowledge to work every day for 4 years, past the same kitchen, past the same gate, telling himself it wasn't his story to tell. "Mr. Ellison, I should have said something a long time ago," Walter said, hat in his hands, not quite meeting Xavier's eyes. "Your mother put something in that girl's tea. She told me to keep quiet, said I'd never work in this town again if I opened my mouth." Xavier felt the floor tilt the way it had the night Angela's world ended. "Say that again." "It was never real, sir. None of it. Your mother and Miss Vanessa set the whole thing up. Miss Vanessa took the photograph before the girl even fully woke up. Your mother arranged everything else." Xavier sat down slowly, like his legs had stopped being reliable. "Why now? Why are you telling me this now, after 4 years?" Walter twisted the hat in his hands. "Because I got a granddaughter now, sir, and I keep thinking about what I'd want someone to do if it was her getting blamed for something she didn't do. I couldn't carry it anymore." Xavier sat with that for a long moment before he asked the only question that actually mattered. "Do you know where she is now? Where Angela went?" Walter shook his head. "No, sir, but I heard once, through the old kitchen staff, that she opened up some kind of little shop across town. Sewing, I believe. That was enough." Xavier had spent 4 years assuming Angela had simply disappeared, the way people who don't matter to a family like his are allowed to disappear. He hadn't considered, until that exact moment, that she might have spent those same 4 years building something, while he'd spent them slowly forgetting the sound of her voice. Comment, "I knew it," if you saw this coming a few minutes ago. And comment, "Stir the pot," if you think Vanessa is worse than Diane, because I have thoughts, and I want to hear yours first. Xavier didn't yell. He'd learned, in 4 years of silence, that yelling never got him the truth. It only ever got him what his mother wanted him to hear. "Tell me the whole thing," he said, sitting across from her at the same table she'd once served him coffee at every morning. "All of it. Right now." Diane's hands trembled around her cup, but her voice stayed steady, the way it always had. "I did it to protect this family. Vanessa's father's contract was worth more than your grandson," Xavier cut in. "Because that's what you traded him for." The cup slipped from Diane's hands and cracked against the saucer. "You have a grandson," Xavier said quietly, watching something in his mother's face finally crack open the way the cup had. "His name is Micah. He has your late husband's laugh. And he has spent 4 years not knowing anything about this family, which frankly might be the only decent thing you accidentally gave him." Xavier. 4 years, mother. 4 years of a woman raising my son alone, working 2 jobs, burying her own father without a single call from this house because you needed a contract more than you needed the truth. "I didn't know she was pregnant," Diane said, and for a moment it almost sounded like an excuse she believed herself. "If I had known, would it have changed anything?" Xavier asked. "Or would you have just found a different way to make her disappear?" Diane didn't answer that. She didn't have to. They both already knew. "I keep thinking about the 4 years I spent believing I was the one who'd been betrayed," Xavier said quietly. You let me carry that. You watched me carry it. I thought I was protecting you, Diane said. You weren't protecting anyone but yourself. Diane didn't argue further. For the first time in the whole story, she didn't have a comeback ready. She just sat there, staring at the broken cup, looking, for once, like an old woman instead of a fortress. Vanessa didn't deny it when Xavier came to her apartment. The one she'd moved into after the engagement quietly dissolved on paper, but never officially, publicly, in the way either of them wanted to admit. I loved you, she said, arms crossed, chin up, defending herself the way people do when they know the defense won't hold. You were about to marry me, and then she looked at you the way she never looked at me. What was I supposed to do? You were supposed to be honest, Xavier said. Instead, you let a woman believe she'd lost her mind for 4 years. You let a child grow up without a father because you couldn't stand to lose an engagement you were already losing anyway. You don't know what it felt like, Vanessa said, voice cracking for the first time, watching you look at someone else the way you used to look at me. I spent 3 years planning a wedding. I could feel slipping away in real time, and nobody was honest with me either. Your mother made it sound like I had a right to protect what was mine. You didn't have a right to destroy someone else's life to keep it, Xavier said. I can explain. There's nothing left to explain, Vanessa. There's just nothing left. She almost said something else, some final attempt to make him understand, but the words dissolved before they reached her mouth. She'd spent 4 years telling herself the lie had been necessary. Standing in that doorway watching him leave, she finally let herself feel exactly how much it had cost and exactly how little it had actually gotten her. He left her standing in that doorway, the same way Diane had once left Angela standing in a hospital hallway with a check. She didn't want one more woman in this story finally understanding what it felt like to be the one no longer wanted in the room. If you've ever watched someone finally get called out after years of pretending like this video, it's satisfying every time. Xavier didn't ask Angela to forgive him right away. He knew better than that now. He started small. He found her a better location for her shop, no strings, and when she tried to refuse it, he said the only thing that actually mattered. This isn't charity, Angela. This is 4 years of child support I owe you, converted into something that isn't just a check. You don't owe me a relationship, she said, arms crossed, guarding the exact place in her chest that had spent 4 years learning not to expect anything from anyone. Just because you found out doesn't mean you have to want this. I know, Xavier said. I want it anyway. Not because of Micah, because of you. Because for 4 years I compared every woman I met to the one who never once flinched at my mother, and none of them measured up. I spent 4 years angry at a version of you that never existed. For the first few weeks, he didn't push for anything more than time with his son. He showed up Saturday mornings, learned which cartoons Micah actually cared about versus which ones were just background noise, learned that the boy took his sandwiches cut in triangles and refused them any other way. Angela watched all of it from behind the counter, arms crossed, waiting to see if the effort was real or performance. It kept showing up real, week after week, whether she was watching or not. By the second month, Xavier had learned the names of Micah's 3 favorite dinosaurs, had sat through 4 viewings of the same cartoon movie without complaint, and had started showing up on non-Saturdays too. Sometimes just to drop off fabric he'd found at a supplier through the shipping company, sometimes with no excuse at all, beyond wanting to be in the same room. Angela noticed the difference between a man performing effort for an audience and a man who no longer needed one. This was the second kind. Angela looked at him for a long moment, weighing 4 years of survival against 4 minutes of a man finally saying the right thing. You're going to have to earn this slowly, she said. Not with a shop, with time. I've got time, Xavier said. I've got nothing but time now. Type redemption if you think Xavier's earned a second chance, and tell me why in the comments, because half of you are going to disagree with me, and I want the argument. Diane lost the contract with Vanessa's family within the month. She lost her son's trust for considerably longer, but she showed up every week, uninvited, patient outside Angela's new shop, until one afternoon Angela let her in. I'm not asking you to love me, Diane said, and for the first time in the whole story, her voice actually broke. I'm asking to know my grandson before I run out of time to. Angela looked at her for a long moment, long enough that Diane braced for the door to close, the way it always had in that house whenever someone stopped being useful to her. He asks about his grandmother sometimes, Angela said instead. I never knew what to tell him. Maybe it's time you told him yourself. Diane sat across from a 5-year-old boy an hour later, hands folded in her lap the way they'd been folded in 100 boardrooms. And for the first time in the story, they were shaking for a reason that had nothing to do with control. "Hi," Micah said, unimpressed, the way only a 5-year-old can be with a stranger. "Are you really my grandma?" "I am," Diane said. "I haven't been a very good one so far." "That's okay," Micah said, already climbing onto the chair next to her. "You can start now." Over the following months, Diane learned things about herself she'd spent 60 years avoiding. She learned that control had never once made her feel loved, only obeyed. She learned that Yvonne, after 11 years of quiet service, had been quietly hoping for exactly this kind of unraveling the whole time, not out of spite, but because she'd always suspected the coldness at the top of that house wasn't the only thing Diane was capable of. She started small, showing up to Micah's preschool events without being asked, learning to sit on the floor of a tailoring shop instead of expecting to be brought a chair, learning that an apology wasn't a single sentence, but a habit you had to keep proving, week after week, long after the person you'd wronged stopped expecting you to. If you believe people can actually change, even the ones who hurt you the worst, tell me in the comments, because I want to know if you believe it too. A year later, Xavier and Angela married in the backyard of the house Diane once ruled like a fortress, the same yard where Angela used to hang laundry with her head down, praying nobody would speak to her. This time, when she walked across that grass, every single person in that yard was watching her on purpose, and not one of them looked away first. Micah walked her down the aisle, 6 years old now, holding a ring pillow like it was the most important job in the world, grinning at his own mother like he already knew this was the happy ending she'd been sewing together, one hem at a time, for 4 straight years. Diane sat in the front row, no longer the woman giving orders, just a grandmother, finally watching the family she almost destroyed choose, over and over, to let her stay. Yvonne, the housekeeper who'd handed Angela that folded list of rules 4 years earlier, stood near the back, tears in her eyes, thinking about the 3 young women who came before Angela and never got a chance to come back. She made herself a quiet promise that night, watching Angela in that ivory dress. If she was ever handed another folded list of rules to give some frightened new girl, she'd tear it up first. Denise sat 2 rows behind Diane, holding a program she'd need for nothing since she already knew the whole story better than most of the guests. She caught Angela's eye once, mid-ceremony, and mouthed the words, "Times told you so," times the same thing she'd said the day Angela first told her. Xavier had walked back into the shop. Mr. Okafor was there too, in the back with Yvonne, the landlord who'd once cut Angela's rent in half because everybody needs one person who just says yes for once, he'd asked, half joking, if the shop was going to survive her becoming an Ellison. Angela had told him the shop wasn't going anywhere. She'd built it with her own hands, and she wasn't handing it over to anyone, husband included. He'd laughed and said that was exactly the answer he'd hoped for. The truth doesn't always come out on your timeline. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes a guilty man showing up at a doorstep he swore he'd never revisit. But it always finds its way back to the person who deserved to hear it first. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, drop a like, and answer me honestly in the comments. Would you have let Diane back in, or would you have kept that door closed for good? I'll read every single answer.